Mr. Santos, the court has no time for his linguistic fantasies, said Judge Harrison with contempt, causing muffled laughs in the Miami federal court. A 68-year-old immigrant who has barely ended elementary school cannot dominate 9 languages. Manong Eduardo Santos remained standing, his erect posture contrasting with the handcuffs that restricted his fists. At age 68, Filipino had been accused of leading an international document forgery network, allegedly using multiple languages to deceive migratory authorities. Federal prosecutor Marcus Webb, ambitious and known for his cruelty to elderly immigrants, smiled maliciously as he organized his roles. Your Excellence, this man claims to have translated documents into Tagalog, Spanish, English, Mandarin, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, Thai, and Malay. It is obviously a scam elaborated to gain sympathy. In the first row, Maria Santos held firmly the hand of her 12-year-old granddaughter, Sophia. They had traveled 3 states to be there. Eduardo had never lied about anything in his life. He had worked 40 years as a night janitor, saving every penny to bring the family of the Philippines. The defendant is accused of falsifying more than 200 immigration documents in the last 5 years, continued Webb, walking theatrically around the room, documents that allowed the illegal entry of hundreds of people in the United States. Eduardo closed his eyes briefly, remembering the past nights helping desperate families. Each birth certificate, each diploma, each medical certificate translated free in its small apartment in Little Havana. They were not falsifications. They were linguistic bridges built with love for people who had no one else. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses impatiently. 62 years in the judiciary had taught him to recognize liars, and that old Philippine was clearly trying to deceive the court with impossible stories. Mr. Santos, his supposed linguistic abilities are irrelevant here, Harrison declared coldly. The facts are simple. False documents were found in your residence during the federal search. They were not false, Eduardo answered calmly, his voice carrying decades of silent dignity. These were translations made to people who needed help. Webb burst out laughing. Your Excellency, this man has transformed his home into a fraudulent document factory, exploring the vulnerability of his own immigrant community for personal profit. Security cameras captured each movement, every expression of contempt addressed to the Philippine elderly. What no one in that room knew was that Eduardo Santos had learned much more during his 4 decades working in the night shifts of Miami's most important buildings. In the silent corridors after midnight, cleaning offices of lawyers, politicians, and entrepreneurs, Eduardo had developed not only fluency in 9 languages, but also a photographic memory for conversations, documents, and secrets that the elite of this city thought they were safe in the shadows of dawn. Your own public defender does not seem to believe in her allegations, mocked Webb, pointing to young lawyer Sarah Kim, newly formed, who nervously flipped her roles. It was her 3rd case as a defender, and facing the relentless Marcus Webb visibly scared her. Eduardo calmly observed the audience full of journalists, curious, and court staff. Some whispered with each other, others typed furiously into their cell phones. Everyone expected to see another elderly immigrant being crushed by the system. Webb approached the evidence table, holding a brown envelope. These documents unequivocally prove that the defendant not only falsified hundreds of papers, but charged for this service, transforming the despair of his community into personal profit. Eduardo's granddaughter, Sophia, squeezed his grandmother's hand harder. At school, the children had already started mocking her. Their family are criminals, they said in the corridors. While everyone in the room mocking their linguistic abilities, Eduardo kept that serenity that only exists in whom he has witnessed much worse storms, and kept powerful enough secrets to make all Miami shake in his foundations. If you are following this incredible story of prejudice and revelations that will turn the game completely, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple Filipino janitor was about to expose truths that would make the powerful of this city begging for mercy. Webb approached the evidence table with the confidence of a predator who already saves the victory. Your Excellence, allow me to present some of these translations that the defendant claims to have made free of charge for charity. He raised a NASIM certificate with various versions in different languages. This certificate was allegedly translated from Tagalog to English, but our experts confirmed serious inconsistencies in the translation, clearly falsified. Eduardo kept his expression serene, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He knew every word of that certificate was from little Miguel Santos, only 3 years old, who needed the document to meet with his parents after 2 years of forced separation. And this, Webb continued dramatically, holding a university degree, supposedly translated from Mandarin. The defendant charges $500 per document, exploring desperate families. Sarah Kim finally found courage to get up. Object, Your Excellence. There is no evidence that my client has charged any amount for his services. Denied, Harrison answered without even looking at her. Continue, web promoter. In the audience, a middle-aged Asian woman began to rock nervously. It was Mrs. Chen, mother of the student whose diploma Eduardo had translated. She whispered something to the man beside him, who immediately began to make calls. Webb smiled maliciously. But what impresses me most, Your Excellence, is the boldness of this man. He really expects us to believe that a night caretaker, who spent 40 years cleaning bathrooms and emptying dumpsters, developed fluency in 9 complex languages. I worked in many places, Eduardo said calmly, his first words in 20 minutes. I learned from people. The room exploded in cruel laughs. Did you hear that? Webb turned theatrically to the jury. He learned from people, as if millennial languages could be absorbed by osmosis during cleaning intervals. Harrison hit the hammer, but still smiled. Mr. Santos, please spare us from these fantasies. This court deals with facts, not fairy tales. What none of them knew was that Eduardo Santos had spent 4 decades working in the building that housed Miami's most influential offices. During those lonely shifts at dawn, he not only cleaned, he watched, listened, and silently collected information that now formed a devastating mental file about corruption, bribes, and conspiracies. Webb approached Eduardo dangerously. Do you know what I find more pathetic in you, Santos? It probably believes even in these lies. 40 years clearing dirt must have affected your perception of reality. The words cut deep, but Eduardo remained motionless. In the front row, Sophia squeezed her grandmother's hand so much that her fingers were white. Web promoter is right, Harrison agreed, adjusting his expensive glasses. This case is a waste of time. An elderly immigrant trying to gain fame at the expense of the judiciary. Sarah Kim looked desperately at her rolls. It was his 3rd case as a public defender, and he could already feel the defeat approaching as an inevitable storm. What she didn't realize was the slight smile that went through Eduardo's lips when Webb mentioned the 40 years of work. 4 decades by cleaning the same building meant 4 decades with access to Webb and associate offices, where the prosecutor kept his private practice parallel to his public career. Each night, Eduardo had witnessed telephone conversations, given documents left on tables, observed secret meetings that took place after the work. His photographic memory had cataloged every sordid detail of the true nature of that system that now judged it. Webb turned to the jury with his most charming smile. Sweaty gentlemen, do not allow this theater to distract them from the facts. This man is a criminal who has explored his own community and now tries to hide behind impossible stories about miraculous polyglottism. Each word increased the silent anger that grew in Eduardo's chest, not just for injustice but for hypocrisy. The same man who accused him of exploiting immigrants had built his personal fortune doing just that, charging absurd values of families desperate for basic legal services. For a moment, when everyone laughed at their linguistic allegations, Eduardo slightly lowered his head, and in this gesture Webb saw a confirmation of victory. But anyone who knows true strength knows that it does not scream or display itself. She patiently expects the right time to show that underestimate someone can be the biggest mistake you can make. That night, Eduardo Santos came home in the small apartment in Little Havana at 2347, as he had always been. Maria was waiting with a cup of hot tea and red eyes of worry. How was it today? She asked, knowing that the answer would be painful. Eduardo sat heavily on the kitchen table, where dozens of translated documents were organized in careful LLAs. They laugh when I say I speak 9 languages. They think I'm an old liar. Sophia, who should be sleeping, appeared at the corridor door. Grandpa, why don't they believe you? Eduardo smiled sadly to his granddaughter. Because sometimes people only see what they want to see, my dear. What they didn't know was that Eduardo had started working at the Miami corporate building in 1984, when Marcus Webb was still an ambitious young lawyer who left confidential documents scattered on the table during his nighttime hours. 40 years cleaning the same offices meant 40 years observing, listening, and involuntarily witnessing conversations that happened when everyone thought there was no one around. Eduardo had developed his photographic memory out of necessity. He needed to remember cleaning details for multiple clients, but ended up memorizing much more. The next morning, Sarah Kim appeared in Eduardo's apartment with a desperate expression. Mr. Santos, I need to be honest. This case is very difficult. Webb has an impeccable reputation and considerable political influence. Eduardo served coffee for the young lawyer. Sarah, can I ask you a question? Do you know the promoter's private practices? Like this? She frowned. Does he have a private office beyond the public prosecutor? Sarah hesitated. Well, yes. Webb and Associates. Why question? Eduardo walked to a drawer and withdrew a yellowish envelope. Because for 4 decades cleaning that office, I saw a lot of things. Telephone conversations, secret meetings, documents that should not exist. Sarah's eyes widened. Lord Santos, what exactly do you see? 6. Webb charging absurd values of immigrant families for services that should be free. I saw him guiding customers to lie in immigration processes. I saw fraudulent contracts signed at dawn. Eduardo opened the envelope, revealing pages of handwritten notes with dates, schedules, and precise details. My photographic memory kept everything. Every conversation, every illegally charged amount. Each family explored. Sarah flipped her pages, increasingly impressed. Mr. Santos, this is evidence of systematic corruption, but why have you never denounced before? Who would believe in a Filipino janitor against a federal prosecutor? Eduardo sighed. But now he made a mistake. He has accused me publicly, brought cameras, created a stage. Sometimes arrogance is the worst enemy of a person. At that moment, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Chen, the mother of the student whose diploma Eduardo had translated. Mr. Santos, I saw in the news about your case. I want to help. I have other parents here with me. How many others? Eduardo asked. 12 families, all willing to witness that you never charged a penny. That saved our children, our dreams. Sarah looked at Eduardo with increasing admiration. Mr. Santos, I think I completely underestimate your situation. You're not just a defendant. You are someone Webb fears. Eduardo smiled for the first time in weeks. Sarah, tomorrow in court, when they laugh at my linguistic skills, I want you to ask me to show a demonstration, not just the languages, but from everything I have learned for 40 years watching silently. In the living room, Sophia played with a 1,000-piece puzzle, heritage of patience and determination of her grandfather. Grandpa always says that the most important pieces are stored until the end, she murmured to herself. While Sarah organized her new defense strategy, Eduardo remained calm in the kitchen chair, knowing that 40 years of respectful silence were about to become the most devastating demonstration that underestimating someone can be the biggest mistake a person can make in life. It was when everyone laughed at their linguistic allegations that something unexpected began to take shape, not only in the small apartment where he meticulously organized his evidence, but especially in the determined look that now shone with an intensity that made Sarah realize that something extraordinary was about to happen in court. So, Mr. Santos, Judge Harrison leaned forward with a cruel smile, still insists on this 9 languages, or will you finally admit your scam? Eduardo stood slowly, his handcuffs tangling in the absolute silence of the room. Your Excellence, if you allow me 5 minutes, can prove that not only do these languages but also that I know much more about this court than they think. Webb burst out laughing. This is ridiculous. Let's not turn this court into a circus to satisfy the whims of a criminal. 5 minutes, Eduardo repeated calmly. If I fail, I accept any sentence, but if I prove my innocence, I hope the truth about corruption in this system also comes to light. Harrison hesitated. The cameras were broadcasting live, and the morbid curiosity won. Very well, 5 minutes, not a second more. Eduardo closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the promise made to his deceased wife years ago. If one day needs to defend our dignity, I will use every word I learned from love. When he opened them, he started in perfect Tagalog. Ang gotohanan ay hindi nangangailangan ng pagsasalin. Truth does not need translation. His voice echoed through the room with a fluency that made the first murmurs by surprise. Without stopping, he continued in Mandarin. 在40年的工作中，我学到了不仅仅是语言。In 40 years of work, I learned much more than languages. Mrs. Chen in the audience was thrilled, recognizing the perfection of the accent. The Spaniard flowed as music. La impriterasi en cualquier language sigue siendo injustice. Webb was visibly pale, his nervous eyes traveling the room. Eduardo relentlessly continued in Japanese. Cheng yi ha gengyuoi wen banai. Justice does not choose languages. In Korean, 진실은 모든 언어로 같은 가지고 있습니다. Truth has the same power in all languages. The room was completely hypnotized. Vietnamese flowed effortlessly. Toi hok juoch tun hung ngoi toi fuk vu. I learned from the people I served. In Thai, Huam Chringam Samarth Chnaitel Od Aip. The truth cannot be hidden forever. Finally, the Malaysian ended his demonstration. Patu tahun membersihkan pejabat screen, mengajarkan saya lebih dari bahasa. 40 years cleaning offices taught me more than languages. The silence was sepulchral. Harrison was white as a paper. Webb held the table so as not to fall. Eduardo smiled serenely. Now, about these translations you call fakes. He turned to Webb directly. Webb prosecutor, you remember the telephone conversation of March 15, 2019, when you instructed Mrs. Rodriguez to lie about her arrival date to the United States in exchange for $8,000. Webb jumped out of the chair. This is impossible. As you can know, because I was cleaning your office that night at 23:15 precisely. Eduardo remained impotized. Or the September 7, 2021 meeting, when you charged $15,000 from the Kim family to accelerate a process that should be free. The room exploded in murmurs. Sarah Kim held her breath, realizing where Eduardo wanted to go. Your Excellency, Eduardo turned to Harrison. For 40 years cleaning Miami's corporate building, I witnessed hundreds of conversations that you found private. My photographic memory kept every detail of each corrupt scheme. Harrison was sweating visually. These are allegations without foundation. Eduardo opened the envelope that Sarah had brought. I have dates, times, exact values, names of exploited clients. 40 years of systematic corruption documented by someone you considered invisible. Webb tried a last desperate card. He is inventing all this to get rid of the accusations. At that moment, the court door opened. Mrs. Chen entered, followed by 12 Asian families, all holding documents. We are the families Mr. Santos helped for free, she shouted in broken English. He saved our children, our dreams. One by one, the families rose, witnessing as Eduardo had never charged a penny, as their translations had saved lives, gathered families, allowed urgent medical treatments. Webb was white as paper, sweat dripping by forehead. Harrison beat his hammer desperately, but had completely lost control of the situation. Sarah Kim got up triumphantly. Your Excellency, I move through the immediate cancellation of all accusations against my client. The evidence clearly show that he has practiced acts of charity, not crimes. On social networks, Eduardo Santos already viralized worldwide. The man who everyone underestimated had just exposed decades of corruption, using exactly the talents they tried to ridicule. When Webb realized that his political career and lawyer license were ruined forever, Eduardo's serene smile showed that 40 years of silent patience had been the necessary time to prove that underestimating someone could be the greatest mistake a person makes in his life. With a broken voice and sweat running down his forehead, Judge Harrison muttered, "Case, if annulled, all accusations are withdrawn." The metallic sound of the handcuffs falling to the floor was drowned out by the explosion of joy that took over the room. Eduardo ran to the arms of Maria and Sofia, finally free. The tears of her granddaughter wet her shoulder as she whispered, "I knew you were going to win, Grandpa. I always knew." Webb remained paralyzed next to the evidence table, watching his political career and lawyer license to shatter in real PO. The trial videos already accumulated millions of views, and the comments were merciless. This prosecutor is a monster, deporting the Webb, not Eduardo. Justice was done finally. In the following days, research on corrupt Webb practices has advanced quickly. The FBI seized decades of documents from the Webb and Associate Office, confirming every detail that Eduardo had memorized during his decades of silent work. 53 immigrant families presented themselves as victims of extortion. Harrison was forced to retire in advance after an internal investigation revealed her history of systematic bias against immigrants. His pension was drastically reduced, and he lost eligibility for positions in federal courts. Webb lost not only his license, but also faced criminal accusations for extortion, conspiracy, and exploitation of vulnerable people. His mansion in Coral Gables was mortgaged to pay court fines, and his wife publicly asked for divorce, taking half of the remaining assets with him. 6 months later, Eduardo Santos received the Medal of Honor from the city of Miami at the hands of the mayor himself. This man represents the best of the American spirit, declared during the nationally transmitted ceremony. He proved that dignity, knowledge, and perseverance always triumph over prejudice and arrogance. The University of Miami offered Eduardo a position as an honorary teacher of applied linguistics, where he created the first free translation program for immigrant communities in the country. Students around the world traveled to learn from the man who turned 40 years of night cleaning into the most powerful demonstration that true knowledge does not know social barriers. Sarah Kim, inspired by the case that defined her career, specializes in immigrant rights and opened her own office, offering free services to needy families. Eduardo taught me that justice is not about gaining cases, it is about defending human dignity, she said in an interview with the 60-minute program. The 12 families Eduardo had helped freely created an educational fund on their behalf, which has benefited more than 200 young immigrants with full scholarships. Mrs. Chen became the first president of the background, saying, "Lord Santos saved my son, now we save other children." Webb, on the other hand, was sentenced to 8 years in federal arrest after a trial that lasted 3 months. His assets were confiscated to compensate the families who had systematically exploited. During the trial, he tried to blame cultural differences and misunderstanding by his actions, but the jury deliberated for only 2 hours. He lost the yacht of $2 million, the imported cars, the Hampton Beach house, and especially the respect of their own children. who changed surnames to escape the public shame associated with the name Webb. During his early months in prison, Webb tried to write an autobiography entitled Misrendide My True Story, but no publisher showed interest. The few former colleagues who still spoke to him mentioned that the book looked more like self-pitying than a genuine reflection on their crimes. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, 2 years after the trial, Eduardo sat in the backyard of his new home, a gift from the Miami Philippine community, watching Sophia playing with other children who spoke English, Tagalog, and Portuguese. "Grandpa," she shouted, running to him, "girls want you to teach them for them." Eduardo smiled, remembering the words of his late wife. "True revenge is not to destroy who harmed you, Eduardo. It is to build something so beautiful that they realize how small their prejudices are." The television program 60 Minutes made a special documentary about the case, entitled The Janitor Who Changed Miami. The episode has won 3 Emmy Awards and inspired legislative changes across the country on immigrant rights and judiciary reform. Today, at the age of 70, Eduardo Santos is no longer the invisible caretaker who cleaned offices at dawn. It is a global inspiration, living proof that underestimate someone based on their origin, age, or profession can be the greatest mistake a person makes in life. Webb tried to destroy a simple and honest man, but eventually revealed to the world a giant of human dignity. Eduardo has learned that the best revenge is not to return the evil suffered. It is to achieve greatness that their enemies could never imagine or understand. If this story has touched your heart and showed that justice always finds your way, be sure to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications for more real stories of overcoming and transformation that proves that to see Didira's strength is born exactly where the least is expected to find it.